I woke up to the sound of the house settling. The usual creaks and groans of old wood that had become so familiar. They'd become a part of the rhythm of my life. But today, something was different. The air felt thicker, heavier, like the weight of the house itself had shifted. I had found the photograph the night before, tucked in the back of an old book my father had left on the shelf. It wasn't the first time I had come across something I wasn't supposed to see. But this time was different. It was a photo of my stepmother and my father. Yes, but also a woman I didn't recognize, standing too close to him. A smile too intimate to ignore. The photograph wasn't old, it was recent. From the last few months. I had no idea who she was. But the look on my father's face told me everything. He wasn't just posing for the camera. He was there in the moment, caught in something I had never seen, something hidden from me. I had planned to confront him, to ask him about it, but when I woke up that morning, I found my stepmother already in the living room. The photo I had left on the kitchen counter now missing. Her movements were too quick, too deliberate as she moved through the room. Her back to me as I stood frozen in the doorway. Something in my gut told me she knew I had seen it. She didn't need to ask, she could tell by the way I looked at her. By the way I watched her every movement. Her back was straight, her posture controlled. But I saw the tremble in her fingers as she held the coffee mug. The way her eyes flickered just for a moment when she realized I was watching her. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I sat down at the table, my gaze never leaving her. I waited for her to speak. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Until she finally turned, her eyes meeting mine with a flash of something I couldn't place: fear, anger, or perhaps guilt. "Where's the photograph?" I asked quietly, my voice almost drowned by the tension in the room. I could feel it, swirling around us. Like the thick smoke from a fire that hadn't yet been put out. She didn't flinch. Instead, she placed the coffee mug down slowly, too slowly, and looked at me for a long moment. "It's gone," she said, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp and measured. "It doesn't belong here." I stood up then, my heart racing, and walked over to the counter, trying to control the shaking in my hands. "Why did you take it? What was in it that was so important?" Her gaze flickered to the window for just a second, like she was looking for something outside. A way to escape. She shook her head, taking a deep breath. "You don't need to know about that," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Some things are better left buried, left forgotten." I felt the anger rising in my chest. She had always been the one to hide things, to sweep the truth under the rug. To put on that perfect smile and pretend like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. I knew it, she knew it, and my father was the one who had been lied to. The one who had been kept in the dark. "I need to know," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. "You can't just erase things like that, like they don't matter. I need to understand why you're doing this." She took a step back, her face tightening. "You have no idea what you're asking," she said, almost whispering. "I did it for you. For us." "For us?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How? How is hiding the truth, for us?" She glanced over at the fireplace, where the smoke from the morning fire still lingered in the air, a faint trace of charred wood. Her eyes hardened as she turned back to me. "Because if your father ever sees that photo, everything will fall apart," she said. Her voice low, urgent. "I couldn't let him see it. I couldn't let him know." "What's in that photo?" I demanded. "Who is she? What's going on between you and him?" But she didn't answer. Instead, her hand reached out toward the window, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they brushed the curtain aside. "It doesn't matter anymore. He'll never know, and neither will you," she said, the finality in her words as cold as the winter air outside. I knew then that there was nothing I could do. The truth was already buried, already hidden away. The photograph wasn't just a memory, it was a threat, a symbol of the betrayal between them. A betrayal I couldn't undo, no matter how much I wanted to. She turned away from me then, her back once again to me as she walked across the room, her steps swift and purposeful. The photograph had been burned, its edges charred, its story erased. She had done it before he could see it, before he could ask the questions I had wanted to ask. The silence that filled the room after she left was suffocating, the truth so close, yet so far away. I wanted to scream, to tear everything apart, but I stayed still, my chest tight, my mind spinning. The photograph was gone, but the secrets it held were still there, locked away in the walls of the house, buried deep beneath the surface. And I knew, in that moment, that some things could never be erased. Some truths, no matter how much you try to hide them, would always burn through the lies, leaving a scar that could never heal. The house felt colder that evening. My father had returned home late, as usual, and my stepmother was already in the kitchen, busy with something, though the smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. I had watched her earlier, from the corner of my eye, burning the photograph before she could face my father with it. She had placed it carefully in the fire, watching it curl up, the edges blackening and disintegrating into ash. She hadn't said a word when I asked about it, just shrugged it off. But I saw it, the tremble in her hands, the tightness in her jaw as she watched it disappear into the flames. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The photograph, the woman in it. It wasn't the first time I had seen traces of her, of that other woman who seemed to hover in the background of my father's life. But this time, this photo was different. There was something raw about it, something too real to ignore. She had been too close to my father, far too close, her fingers grazing his arm, a smile between them that didn't belong. I stayed in my room that night, listening to the sound of their voices filtering through the house. She was laughing too loudly, too brightly, over something trivial, something my father had said. I hated it. I hated how she pretended, how she wore the mask of everything being okay. Like she didn't just destroy the only piece of evidence that could break the quiet facade between them. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I went downstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I passed the living room. My father was reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee. My stepmother was arranging the cushions on the couch, adjusting everything until it was perfect, until it fit her image of a perfect, peaceful home. "Do you ever think about the past?" I asked, suddenly, without meaning to. I was standing in the doorway, watching her. Her back stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "Why would I?" she said, her voice calm, but something in it was strained, like she was holding on to something, trying to keep it hidden. "The past is gone. You should focus on the present." I took a step closer. "You told me to forget about it," I said, the words coming out more bitter than I meant them to. "But how can I? How can I just forget?" She turned then, her eyes cold, her expression almost unreadable. "I did what I had to do," she said softly. But there was a sharpness in her tone that cut through the calm of the room. "For him. For all of us." I didn't understand. I wanted to ask more, to demand the truth from her. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she had always been, calm, composed, in control. I had always admired her strength, her ability to keep everything together. But now, all I could see was a woman who had carefully torn away the pieces of her own past to keep her perfect world intact. You burned it, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. You burned the photograph. Her eyes flashed, just for a second. You didn't need to see it, she replied, her voice tight. You don't need to know. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father called from the living room, asking me to come sit with him. I hesitated, the words still hanging in the air between us. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I turned, walked away, and left the room. I sat with my father in silence, my mind racing, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. The photograph had burned away, and with it, the truth. And I was left alone with the fragments of everything I had never been allowed to know. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of her burning the photograph. It wasn't just about the woman in it. It was about everything they had kept hidden, everything that had been buried between them. Between us, behind walls and smiles and carefully curated lives. I closed my eyes and tried to forget, tried to push the thoughts away. But the truth, like the photograph, had been burned into my memory. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase it. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I could feel it in the walls, in the silence that clung to each room, in the way every creak of the floorboards seemed too loud, too accusing. It had been days since the photograph had been burned. Days since I had confronted my stepmother with the truth I knew she was trying to erase. And yet, nothing had changed. She moved through the house like a ghost, always smiling, always pretending. But every time I looked at her, I saw the lie hanging between us. Invisible but heavy. My father still hadn't asked. Not once. He was oblivious, lost in the routines of his work, the patterns of his life that hadn't been disturbed. He spoke to me like everything was fine, like nothing had changed, but it had. The weight of the secret between us, the thing I could never unsee, never unknow, was a wall I couldn't break through. I spent my days trying to ignore it, trying to pretend that everything was normal. I went to work, I came home. I smiled when my father asked me how my day had been, but inside, it was like a storm was brewing, silent, relentless, waiting for its moment to break. Then came the night when I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had been in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when I saw her standing by the door. My stepmother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, like she had been waiting for me. She looked at me like she had something she needed to say but couldn't quite bring herself to. Her hands were clasped together in front of her, and she didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she opened her mouth, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her words sharp with the weight of something unspoken. "I did what I had to do." I stared at her, feeling the tight knot in my chest grow even tighter. "What you had to do?" I wanted to scream. "You burned it. You erased the truth. You've been lying to me, to him, to everyone." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, my heart pounding, my eyes locked on hers. "Why didn't you tell him?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Why did you think you had to keep it from him? From me?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if the truth was too much for her to bear. When she opened them again, there was a look of pain in her eyes. Something raw and unguarded that I hadn't seen before. "He doesn't need to know," she said, her voice trembling. "I did it to protect him. To protect you." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You think that keeping the truth from him is protecting him? You think hiding everything from me is protecting me? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, I saw her as the person she was beneath all the walls and pretenses, the person I had never fully understood. She was just as broken as the rest of us. Just as trapped in the web of lies she had woven, and maybe, for the first time, she saw that too. I never meant for you to find out, she said softly, almost to herself. I thought I could keep you from the hurt. Keep you from the truth that would tear everything apart. Everything is torn apart, I said, my voice breaking. It's already ruined. The truth doesn't disappear just because we don't want to face it. You can't just burn it and pretend it never happened. She reached for the counter, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge. I was trying to protect you, she whispered, her eyes distant. But now I don't know if I can protect anyone. We stood there in the silence, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. Thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And I couldn't forgive her, not yet. Not for this. I can't fix it, she said, finally breaking the silence. I can't make it right. I've already done too much damage. I didn't know how to respond. There was nothing left to say. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, and yet I still couldn't process it, still couldn't find a way to make sense of what had been done. What had been hidden from me for so long. I don't know how to trust you anymore, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She nodded, her face pale, resigned. I know. I turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I didn't look back. The photograph was gone, burned beyond recognition. But the truth remained, like an open wound that refused to heal, hanging in the air between us. My stepmother had burned it, but she couldn't burn away what we had lost. And I knew then that I couldn't go back. Not to the way things had been, not to the lies we had built everything on. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that night felt like a slow, unending unraveling. Each morning, I woke up and went through the motions, brushing my teeth, getting dressed, sitting down for meals as though everything was still normal. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. My stepmother's apology, her trembling voice, the weight of the photograph that had been burned and erased, it all lingered in the corners of the house, in the spaces where silence used to live. My father continued on, blissfully unaware of the fracture that had formed between us. He still smiled at me, still asked about my day, still carried on with his work. But I could see the cracks in him, too, now that I knew. The distance between us felt like a chasm that grew wider each time I looked at him. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to tell him. What would telling him accomplish? What could I say to break his world apart, when I couldn't even piece mine together? My stepmother, too, had returned to her role. She cooked, cleaned, smiled, and kept the house in perfect order. But there was something hollow in her now. Something dark behind her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She was living a lie I couldn't escape, and it gnawed at me. Each time she glanced at me like she was waiting for me to crack. To speak the truth we both knew but never acknowledged. It was on the 5th night, after a silent dinner where we all avoided eye contact, that I found her in the living room, sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. She didn't hear me approach, but when I stood in the doorway, she didn't turn around. She just sat there, her posture straight, her hands folded on her lap, as if waiting for something to happen. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked quietly, my voice softer than I intended. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to rage. I just wanted an answer. The truth, even if it tore everything else apart. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't move. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. Everything we were both pretending wasn't there. I thought I was protecting you, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. I thought if I kept it from you, if I kept you safe from the truth, it would be easier for everyone. I stepped closer, the anger that had been simmering inside me bubbling to the surface. Easier? For who? For you? For him? What about me? You think I can't see the cracks? You think I can't feel the lie hanging between us? Her face tightened, and she finally turned to face me. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't place. Regret, maybe, but also fear. Fear that I was seeing her for the first time, the real her. The one who had never been the woman I thought she was. I didn't want to destroy him, she said, her voice strained. I didn't want to destroy us. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. I didn't want you to hate me. The confession was raw, and it hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one I needed. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was trying to protect my father, trying to hold on to the family. To the image of something perfect that had never existed. I stood there in the silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air. And for the first time, I saw her, really saw her, not as the woman who had been my stepmother. Not as the woman who had kept secrets from me. But as the woman who had been living in her own cage of lies. I don't know how to move forward from this, I said. My voice thick with the realization that I was standing at a crossroads, one that would change everything. She nodded, her eyes wet, but she didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just sat there, staring at the fire, watching the flames consume the logs. I don't know how, either. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The only sound the crackling of the fire and the occasional shift in the chair. I wanted to say more, to scream, to ask why she had kept me in the dark for so long. Why she had chosen to protect my father at the cost of my trust. But I couldn't. I couldn't find the words to explain what I was feeling, how angry, how betrayed. How utterly lost I felt. Finally, I turned and left the room, the weight of everything still pressing down on my chest. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't stay in that house where the truth was hidden behind closed curtains, behind burned photographs, behind the mask she wore every day. The house felt colder now, emptier. I could feel the truth curling in the corners of every room. Lingering like smoke that would never quite dissipate. I didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear, everything had changed. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were. But I knew that from now on, there would be no more lies. Not from her. Not from my father. Not from me. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something that had already happened. Something that couldn't be undone. Every corner, every room, seemed to echo with the silence that followed her confession. With the weight of the things left unsaid. My father was in the study, as usual. His work keeping him oblivious to the storm brewing around him. My stepmother was in the kitchen, moving about with the same practiced grace. But I could see it in the way her hands shook as she set the table. The way she couldn't look me in the eye. I wanted to scream at her, to demand more. Why didn't you tell me sooner? But what was the point? The truth was already out, already shattered. And there was no way to put it back together. My heart ached, not just for what had been done, but for the fact that I was now part of a lie so tangled, I couldn't see a way out. The fire was still burning in the hearth from earlier, crackling in the background as I stood in the living room, staring at the empty space between us. I had seen her for what she was, for what she had done, and I couldn't erase the image of her standing by the window that night, burning the photograph, their photograph. She had burned the truth before it could ever reach my father. She had done it to protect him, to protect us, but it had only destroyed everything in the process. I walked toward the kitchen, my feet dragging with the weight of the decision I had yet to make. As I entered, she looked up, her face paling as she met my gaze. I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear she had tried to hide behind all those years of pretending, behind the perfect dinners and the spotless house. For the first time, I saw her as she truly was, a woman who had kept herself hidden, buried under the weight of the lies she thought were protecting us all. "I can't live like this anymore," I said, my voice shaking with something between anger and grief. "I can't pretend everything is fine when I know the truth." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't read. Was it regret? Guilt? Or was it something deeper, something I hadn't seen before? But she didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped them on the apron she still wore. "You should tell him," I continued, my throat tight. "You should tell him the truth." "I can't," she whispered, almost pleading. "It will destroy him. It will destroy everything." "Then what's left?" I asked, the question almost too painful to ask. "If the truth is too much for us, what's the point of pretending?" She didn't answer right away, but I saw her shoulders slump, saw the weight of everything she had been carrying settle over her. It was like the last wall between us had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. "I thought I was protecting you," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I thought if I kept it all hidden, kept it from you, you'd be safe. But I didn't realize how much I was hurting you, how much I was hurting myself." Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and thick. She had believed she was doing the right thing, had believed that keeping us in the dark was somehow better than facing the truth. But now, we were both trapped in the wreckage of her decisions. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But it felt like the question I had to ask, the one that had been haunting me ever since I found the photograph. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted to the window, to the door leading to the study, where my father still sat, oblivious. Then she turned back to me, her face pale, her lips trembling. "I did," she said softly. "I did. But love is a fragile thing. It breaks, it fades, it can't survive when the truth is buried too deep." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I wanted to yell at her, to accuse her of everything she had done to us, to demand answers for the years of lies. But I didn't. I just stood there, my chest heavy with the weight of it all. "Do you think he'll ever forgive you?" I finally asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She closed her eyes, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the counter. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can forgive myself." I didn't know how to respond to that. The idea of forgiveness seemed so far out of reach. How could I forgive her for something like this? How could I forgive the betrayal that had been buried so deeply, so carefully, that I hadn't even seen it until it was too late? And yet, despite everything, I knew I couldn't walk away from her. She was still my stepmother, still the woman who had raised me, the woman who had tried, in her own way, to protect me. But protection had never been about lying. It had never been about hiding the truth. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice barely audible. The words heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow, with a loss that I couldn't understand. Neither do I, she whispered. But I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And as I turned to leave, I knew that this house, would never be the same again. The lies had already started to unravel, and the truth, once exposed, couldn't be hidden again.